Hello, it's Duncan. Dmitry Kandalov and I recently gave a presentation to the JAX London conference on refactoring from Spring to Kotlin. There's been a lot of interest in the topic, so we re-recorded it for your viewing pleasure. And that is in 3, 2, 1.
You need a loud sound so you can synchronize audio and video. I was also wondering if it's a good quality on your side because StreamYard. I don't know. Anyway,
It's a little bit crackly, to be honest with you, but it's okay. We'll find out. What's the worst?
okay.
So, hello, Dmitry. How are you doing?
Hello, Duncan. I'm good. How are you?
Very well. So we did a talk at JAX in London last week, which was October 2022, on a topic that you picked and was a brilliant one, I think, which is refactoring from Spring to Kotlin.
Yep.
And we've had a lot of interest in, the contents of that session, really. So we thought we'd do it again here for your audience and my audience. So the sort of fiction is that we have inherited the Spring Boot app.
The screen is
one on the screen, which is something to do with Gilded Rose, because everything's to do with Gilded Rose, right? I mean, Gilded Rose isn't just an application; it's a way of life. So we've inherited this thing, and we've got to get to grips with it. Really, we've got to understand it, and we're going to do the refactoring to understand thing, I guess, and just get to grips with the code base, understand what it is, how it works. And yeah, so you're our Spring Boot expert, right?
Yeah. I did that talk at a conference, right?
Oh, you did actually. Yeah, that wasn't long ago, actually. Yeah, so you are an expert. And yeah, I think I last used Spring in 2008. Thereabouts. It was certainly before Spring Boot, and I still get sort of XML Bean Factory flashbacks. But let's go through. Let's have a look at the code. If you can maybe show us the entry point, and we'll try and understand what's going on.
Yeah. So from what I remember from the conference, this is the entry point. So it's called Gilded Rose application, but maybe it's main is a better name. At least for me, it will be more obvious. This is an entry point if I look just file names. And there we have main function, which calls run application, which has this class as a parameter. And then this is the only usage of this class. And then the rest is wired by this annotation. And we can click on this icon, which is like a Spring plugin in IntelliJ, and it shows us the objects which this Spring Boot application has inside this application. It's doesn't show any.
Sort of composed of those things, because I mean we can't see it here, can we? Because normally you construct a thing and you get to see what they are, but they just
we don't construct anything here. So it would be nice to see relationships. So the closest thing I found was this diagram, which shows there is an app and there are these things. So because the whole app is just a web application, so maybe web controller is a natural place to start. Well, this is where dependency starts, the dependency graph. So controller is started by Spring Boot magically, and then it gets Gilded Rose service, which is Gilded Rose service simple, which in its own turn gets items repository, just like a source of data basically, and Gilded Rose. Item repository has some JDBC and logger, and Gilded Rose just does some logic. From the classic Gilded Rose code cutter. There are a few other things as well here, but this whole diagram I didn't find it particularly useful because it doesn't really show the relationship between those things. So I basically did my own interpretation, which is this. There is like a Firefox browser, which talks to web controller, which uses Gilded Rose service. So that's like an entry point to domain, I guess. And then there is Gilded Rose, which just does pure domain logic, and items repository, which loads items from database. Yeah, that's
what's good. Can we see it running?
Oh yeah, let's try that. No, it's main. So you can run it. Please. I think it's running now.
Oh, nice. You can click on it. Oh, so it's got security.
Oh yeah, it does. And this is not working, but I think if we say /items and date, which will be 2019, I think this is the format up to, let's say, 20. It should show us something. Oh, I think I don't have database running.
We should have prepared this.
Yes. And then I can do this. And then it will work. Whoa. Took a while. So for a different date, it returns a different set of items.
Okay, so a bunch of JSON and item data from the sort of Gilded Rose algorithm thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what it does. So I can stop it now. And yeah, that's the whole thing. There are a bunch of tests. I think they're pretty good. We run all of them. I think it's 100% code coverage.
In the fullness of time.
I think they compile in tests. I don't know why it's so slow. It shouldn't be too slow. Yeah, 15 seconds, not too slow.
So can we just have a look at that web controller? Because that seems to be the sort of gist of all of the stuff. Okay, so we auto-wire a thing like Gilded Rose service, which is that dependency. That's got all the sort of business logic in it, I guess. And then we have a mapping. So that's the way we express that's creating an HTTP endpoint, basically.
Yeah.
And then the request param says, okay, this is something I get in on a date, I guess, matches with the query string you had.
Yeah, it's based on name, right? This is the name.
Okay, yeah. And then Spring is automagically, because there's a REST controller making it JSON or something, that list of items.
Where does it, like, it has lots of these things. Where does it go? Oh, it goes to service. Then auto-wired candidates. There are none. It kind of shows something, but then it doesn't really get us anywhere. Yeah, so there is no way to navigate to anywhere. It's getting instantiated, from what I can tell.
Well, shall we, let's just sort of find a thing and have a look at it and then maybe sort of refactor. And I'm sort of, my inclination is to start at the inside, of like the deepest level, because that's going to require least things, right? Yeah, Gilded Rose, that's a good place. So we have a test for that maybe as well. Okay, so we have a Spring Boot test, which is an auto-wired Gilded Rose, and that's nullable. Why? So that's nullable because we don't have it yet, and Spring needs to auto-wire it.
Yeah, we could delete it, but then Kotlin doesn't know that Spring will inject it after all.
Oh, okay. But late in it would sort of dig us out of the hole.
It should, I think. So it becomes var instead of val, but it was nullable, so we can fix this bit.
Okay.
So let me run it again.
Okay, that did seem to take quite a long time to run. Like it said it took 2 seconds. Okay, so it's like it said it took half a second, but 3, 4. I mean, that felt like it. Yeah. Okay. So what's that? 242? That one? Yeah.
I wrote a small extension which measures the time like in IDE. I think this time is what Gradle says this text took to run. But there is time it takes for Gradle to initialize and I don't know, all the other things. I think maybe it's what we see here. No, we don't see things here. Oh, it actually runs via IntelliJ as well. So it doesn't run via Gradle. So if I run it via Gradle, it will be different. Oh, it takes
and even slower, but we get the feedback less quickly. Yeah.
No, it's about the same time.
Okay.
It's like 2.
Oh, I guess I had to compile it. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But so it,
It's even worse. It says 42 milliseconds, but it was
really,
it's even worse. Oh my God.
so I think that the test runner is kind of seeing the time that it actually takes to run the test, but not the time it takes to set up the test, right? So it looks to me like it's not really counting the time that like it's taking to auto wire and that sort of thing. And Spring, as I understand it, like goes through the class path and looks things up and tries to like match. You've got this thing that you want to be auto wired, and where can I get one of those from? And that sort of stuff. So I guess that all takes time, right?
Yeah.
So what does Gilded Rose look like?
Yeah.
So it's marked to the service, which I guess is some way of telling Spring that it should be wired, but this has no dependencies at all. So is there any reason we shouldn't just like create one of those in our test?
Yeah, we could, I think. Literally could do that. Then we don't need Spring Boot test, I think.
Okay.
So we could just run it and then it runs faster.
Okay. Runs faster and not only says that it runs faster, but actually like does run a lot more quicker, doesn't it? So
yeah, more than twice.
Okay. So I mean, there seemed to be like there was no point in having Spring there at all. That was just a bit of a waste of time. But I mean, I do see projects where we've got dependency injection. We might as well use it, but right there, it seemed a bit of a waste.
Yeah, I guess maybe it was done like in case you want to inject things into Gilded Rose in the future, but right now it's that.
Maybe it was originally things are injecting into it, and then not anymore. And it's difficult to keep tidy, isn't it? Should we commit that as like this little place that we could?
I'll commit it as refactoring.
In tiny little letters.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've Gilded Rose regression test running a lot quicker, and it's a bit simpler. We haven't had to make things nullable or late in it and so on. Should we step? What's sort of next in our sort of up the dependency?
Try and construct it in the service as well, because if we are constructing this in a certain way in tests, it would be nice to have this symmetry, I think.
Okay, yeah. So we're
yes, I can search for navigate auto-wired candles. No, it shows 2, but I think it's the same place. I don't know why it's appearing.
Okay. And this is the constructor. So interestingly, like things can be in the constructor and they can still be wired, which is good because that way they don't have to be like late in it or whatever. Yeah. But in that case,
in test, I think.
Yeah.
We could.
Well, I mean, in test you can't pass them. You can't make them like you got to have a no-R constructor to your test, unless you sort of.
We can try.
But what you're saying is let's just make this Gilded Rose, right? So let's just create Gilded Rose in here. There's no dependencies of it. That's a little bit weird. What's the type?
It's type annotation of code. Yes. That's it. Needs that. And we don't need service on this thing. So it's like completely out of the Spring annotation.
It's nice to have sort of like things that don't depend. I mean, we could then move that to some other dependency framework, dependency injection if we wanted to, couldn't we, or whatever. But
for some reason, Spring complains about this, even though like we're not asking you to auto-wire. But
in fact, we're kind of specifically telling you not to, aren't we? But okay. But that passes the test. I mean, I guess it must be.
I just ran all of them.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, I could get that.
Commit this, and I'll use this action commit without dialogue, which I have from one of the plugins, limited work in progress. So this is
the plugin plug, isn't it? You're plugging your plugin.
It's just easier to press commit and just it's done.
Yeah.
So I guess we did this bit like Gilded Rose, right? It was easy.
Okay, so that's now sort of out of Spring. Gilded Rose service. Then we changed a little bit, I guess.
Oh yeah. Do you want to?
Let's have another look at Gilded Rose service. While we're there. So this logger is interesting to me. So it seems to me like we are also wiring this logger, but loggers loggers aren't hard to create, right? Um,
No.
and we then got the problem with being val. So we could make it late in it, or I mean, we could just create a logger here, and unless we're
Yeah.
testing our interactions with the logger.
We can look how it's created. I think this
Okay.
this navigation works. That's cool. So it jumps into this function, which is like a factory method.
Okay.
It takes from injection point. Yeah. Takes from injection point the current field member, which could be constructor or field, and then it just calls the.
Oh, okay. So there's some way of annotating a field or a field or a member. I don't know what the difference is. Okay, but
it's like, why would it be different?
But there's not a single one of these in the system. Then this prototype is saying create a new one every time you need one, rather than there being a singleton sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's used in two places, and it will create two loggers. But we could just use the function.
Yeah, with different names, I guess, at that point. Yeah.
Could do something like that. It doesn't need to be nullable. It doesn't need to be in the class.
Okay.
Could be public.
So we could call that, or even better, because I mean, it's a bit of a shame. We'd like to use the same sort of naming strategy. And we know that it's taking the declaring classes name, I guess, from the end of 17. Is that right? Okay, so if we were to make an extension function on any, then it would kind of suck the context out of sort of where it came from.
Something like new logger, but then this will be this Java class simple.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that would kind of be doing the same thing. And then if we call new logger where you'd come from, like give a row service, yeah.
This one, basically.
Yeah. Then any there would be this enclosing class, and we'd have kind of captured it in some cute sort of way. I mean, we're in this position where we don't expect that to change any of the tests, but providing it like starts up at this point, then that's probably a success, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's actually tested anyways.
No. Okay, so this is a bit simpler. We've still got this repository though that's auto-wired.
Yeah.
And what do we need the repository for?
I'll commit this.
Oh yeah, please do.
Yeah, repository. Yeah, I'll navigate to it.
Okay, so this is another.
It's an interface with single implementation, which is called impl.
Yeah.
And it uses JDBC database template.
Okay.
These impls in both places, they make me sad. I would maybe rename it to something like DB items repository. Because like in this case, I can at least imagine being in-memory items repository. So maybe that's a fair thing to do. So it seems funky with one thing. So that's like one change. And then the other, I noticed this was also an impl get row service. It's also one hierarchy thing, but I don't know if I have an idea how to rename this. So maybe just delete the interface altogether.
I mean, providing we never mock it or use it, that's a reasonable sort of thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, we've seen the code and we don't. So I don't know good refactoring. So here I'm just like name shadowing things, basically deleting. Deleting the interface and just manually renaming the class.
Yeah.
So all test rights. So that's refactoring.
Okay, so what we just basically we've removed an unnecessary interface. If we're not calling something really through its interface, and we're just using then I mean, Spring's perfectly happy to create either it creates classes, but it doesn't need them to be expressed as interfaces in order to remove it. Well, that's good.
And coming back to items repository, that's diversion. You want to see it, right?
Well, the logger looks like really low hanging fruit because we've already worked out what to do about that, right? Yeah. So let's just create a new logger in there. Then we wouldn't have to auto-wire that. And this seems to be a place where we already are late in it, but if we just move that into the constructor, then we would, we wouldn't need to be late in it. So it's little. We can sort of tidy those things without really understanding them or thinking about them, can't we?
Yep.
Okay, so we've got a JDBC template, and that's used to talk to JDBC in some sort of way, I guess, because we've got this row mapper, and then we ask the template, the JDBC thing, to run the query for us. Okay, so that's a Spring abstraction over
JDBC.
Over JDBC.
Not sure why it's called template. Design pattern, template.
I think it's a template design pattern. Like you fill in some things, and then the rest gets done for you. Like something like that.
Yeah. Mm.
I'm interested to see how this is in the tests. Maybe look in there and sort of get a feel for what it does.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are no usages of this, right? So we can navigate, and Spring doesn't show us, does it? No, it navigates back to application. So again, it's like, I think Spring breaks navigation ID and doesn't provide anything. So I think
you did that in the test, right?
Yeah, the usage of interface, right, is there. But
okay.
Right. Yeah. Where it might inject it. That's the problem.
Right. Okay, so this is another Spring Boot test. So Spring is going to be like creating everything for us. And we've got this template and we've got an items repository. And they're both auto-wired, and we can't move the constructor because it's a test. But the items repository takes a JDBC template, so we could, if we already had it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So we just create that for us.
If we're trying the same trick with items repository that we had with gilded rows, just construct it in tests first, right?
Yeah.
Manually, yeah. Sounds good to me. So instead of this, we can do db items repository and put JDBC.
Yeah, that would something. We're still injecting something, but okay. So we've injected. What does that say? Late init property JDBC has not been initialized.
I think it's because this field is created before this late init is actually populated by Spring.
Of course, yeah, because yeah. So we could make that lazy and dig ourselves out of that hole. I mean, it's sort of
just delay everything.
Delay everything until it's required. But Kotlin will kind of look after us with it. Will mean that it remembers the DB items repository, but it only creates it on the first use. Okay.
So it's created in setup, and by setup, JDBC will be injected by Spring.
Yes.
That's the difference, right?
Okay. Well, I mean, that's good, but ideally, I guess we'd find a way of like creating this JDBC template ourselves.
Yeah, and we could. It's also interesting. Can we see it? Yeah, we can actually see it how it's created in Spring. So what I did, I clicked on this, on the gutter on the icon, so it takes the key. So actually, we can create it. This is Java.
So you can just create one from a data source.
Yeah, that actually makes me think, like, why don't we auto-wire data source instead?
Okay, yeah. I mean, right, yeah, let's give that a go.
I suppose Spring should be able to do it, and then we could. We need JDBC template, so we can just construct a data source, and it will have to be lazy.
Lazy as well, yeah. So this JDBC data source is used if it works. It works. Okay. Well, did you run all the tests then? It's hard to tell.
I ran just this file because we would change it only this test, but yeah.
That feels like a sort of place we might check in because I'm feeling a little bit nervous at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we've said is that like Spring was auto wiring something, something like closer to the roots of the dependencies. Like it's a more complicated thing. But we said, well, maybe if you auto wired the thing that you know how to create and we don't know how to create, then we can create the rest of the things. That's in our hands now, but because you're also wiring that late, the things that we're creating, we have to do lazily. But that's not a bad strategy.
Yeah.
But we still got this data source, and it would be nice to maybe create one of those ourselves. Is there any way of learning what the data source looks like?
Oh, I was wondering why is it even we could, and we should try definitely. Just wondering, is it even the right level of abstraction? Maybe we could inject data source into DB items repository instead.
Okay, yeah.
Because that sounds like a better abstraction, because this is not Spring dependence, this is data sources, Java SQL, so it's more fundamental.
Okay, that's what you mean. So here, whilst DB items repository depends on a Spring class for its implementation, maybe it shouldn't for its interface, and the constructor is kind of part of its interface. So it would be better if we auto wired the data source and created the JDBC template ourselves.
Yeah, and then I'll run all tests. So, interesting. Oh yeah, data source here.
Yes, because you just changed that.
Yeah. There must be a better way to refactor it rather than manually change.
Yeah, you could like delegate to one thing and another, and then remove the first, can't you? But yeah. Okay, so I like that. I like that change with like we've made both the test and the actual DB items repository depend on a lower level to the more fundamental JDBC abstraction rather than the Spring one. But Spring is still providing it for us. But this is still a Spring Boot test, right? This is still taking quite a time to run. So I'd still like control of this data source. Call me old-fashioned.
Yeah, no, it's well, if we want to construct everything ourselves, right, we'll have to see that, maybe debug it.
Yeah. I mean, it's either that or read through the Spring source.
Yeah, I imagine it will, this active profiles will make Spring read it from some property files, but I guess we could actually see what it's doing. So it's a Hikari data source, you can see the class.
Okay,
and
yeah.
It's this JDBC URL, which means it's H2. You can see it.
Okay, so that's running the in-memory database for our tests.
Yeah, I bet it's coming from here in test. There is application test. So yeah, this is what we see.
Oh, so that's the same URL as we had. Yeah, okay, so maybe we can just create whatever that data source was ourselves.
Yeah, we should be able to. I used Hikari before, and we can just create it. Let me stop. And don't need this. We could create Hikari data source. Then it takes Hikari config. And I think we can do something like apply, and this will be JDBC URL. I can paste this in.
Okay.
This test should work. We'll see. Yeah, it does. Because
that's good.
All the setup is here. Basically creates a table, then populates it. I guess other tests, they just depend on the setup. So yeah.
So it just occurred to me that there is a little wrinkle here, isn't there? That previously we had the JDBC template that was there was single JDBC template, and it was sort of accidentally being used both by this test to create the tables and so on, and then also the DB items repository. And I say accidentally, like it was kind of the same thing, but this I think expresses it better. But our test has its own one to manage this, but any other technology to populate this would be equally as good. And then now the interface to DB items repository is that low level thing, and it can have whatever implementation it likes, which is good for us, right?
Yeah. I think we also don't need to be lazy. So
yeah, that's good.
Yeah. And then we don't need any of...
Absolutely, yeah.
So let me run it again, and we'll see. So its actual time was 3 seconds. And if I delete it, we'll just go to, I don't know, twice as fast. Yeah, well, 3 times nearly.
Okay.
So that's...
I mean, to be fair, it seems to me that when we run a single test, it any test that uses Spring, the first one of them is slow, and then the rest of them are okay. And when we're running single tests, we're kind of cheating a bit because we're saying, "Oh, look, that test is really slow."
Yeah, that's true.
But the problem is, like when we're running all the tests here, we are always we've got like a 3-second penalty for doing Spring at all. But after that, it's something that it's sort of spread over all the tests. It's kind of okay.
I think so.
Okay, so
yeah, there is a significant initial cost, right?
Yeah.
And then there is a bit more cost probably on top of it, but it's not as big as like 2 seconds per test. It's less.
Yeah.
Should we run all tests?
Yeah, let's do that. Check it in. That's a slow one.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's not working.
Okay.
It's just
so the web controller integration test has failed.
Yeah.
Okay, can we just run that on its own?
Oh, wow.
Okay, so it passes on its own, and it fails when we run it as part of all tests.
Yeah. I'll do it again, but I'm pretty sure. Well, let's see, I guess. Never hurts to run it again, but we've seen it yet. Maybe it depends on the order, right? Because DB items go first.
Yeah. Oh, I see. So you're saying that like the second test fails for some.
Yeah. I expect maybe if we could reverse them, maybe we'll see something else. But I think let's look at their. I think
wrong username or password.
This is interesting because we don't have any username or password here at all. How can it be wrong? And it like works. But then, wait. So, sorry. Going back to integration tests, it still uses Spring, right? And it uses files test. So it should be reading from the same properties file as this file.
Okay, and then this is using a JDBC template, and that then is if okay, but that's what that
this is doing, right? Maybe if we debug this, maybe we'll see something. So this data
source. Oh, hold on, no, username Postgres.
Yeah. Don't think there were any usernames.
So Postgres is what you're running in production, effectively. That's when you're running it, not in tests, but.
Yeah, this is interesting. It's like it's taking these names basically from production.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But So the test resources are like overriding application resources where they're there, but if they're not, there, then it's taking the ones from application.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe also H2, it kind of, I don't know, remembers the first.
Because it's in memory. So it's got no way of knowing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very.
Oh, so right. Yeah. So you think that at some point H2 is taking whatever the first credentials it's got, and then the second time round when we try and run that test, it's trying to use Postgres, but that isn't whatever we should be blank, I guess.
Yeah.
First time we used it.
Maybe we hard code something here like this and do the same in the test where we just hard code.
So I have a hunch actually that if you just let those blank, this would work. Like just as a matter of interest, I'm interested to see. Yeah, if you put them as blank there, does that work?
Let's see.
Because we weren't specifying, I think. Oh no, okay. So we're gonna. Well, there.
Interesting.
You were about to specify username and password, and I'm not against it if it makes it work.
Well, I'll do the same material.
Super secret.
Oh, well, unfortunately, our production passwords are secret, so I'd rather put a different password.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it works. Well, it's a bit. I find it a bit disturbing that Spring just like copies properties from production to test. So like if you accidentally misspell this, well, I don't know, in some way, right? You just all of these, you just get production database access.
Yeah, but
in your test, like a drop tables, like at the end of the test.
We've all got DevOps people to stop us making those mistakes those days. Commit that. I think that's good, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So where were we? We did this test, got it out of Spring.
Oh yeah. Okay, that's good.
So that's progress.
That is progress, actually. Yeah. So what have we got? What have we got that we haven't touched then?
I think what we did, just going back to diagram, there's gilded rows, and we basically started moving items repository out of Spring. So should we finish it then? Because
so the test is out of Spring. What about the item repository?
So for Dmitry, yes. So now, where is it used? Well, only in tests, but actually it's used in Guildrow service as well. So it's auto-wired.
Oh, so you could do the same thing there, I guess. Is that your plan?
Oh yeah.
To
yeah, probably. That? Yeah, it's a bit interesting that maybe we don't know how to construct data source and production exactly. Well, we actually do know, but
yeah,
we do know, but I think it won't work because if we construct data source here, we'll need to construct it in one way for tests and in one way for production, but we don't know it here, right? Because these Guildrow service will be still tested via Spring Boot here, and it's still constructed via controller tests. So so instead of like doing that, we could inject data source here and construct DB items repository by passing data source.
So it's the same trick we did before, just like moving to a more fundamental auto-wide dependency. Yeah, okay.
I guess the difference here is that we dependency, which is only used for DB items. I also wonder if we can make it just a construct argument. I think that's a bit more. It's DB field.
And then, in fact, those two can not be constructor arguments at all, right? Those are just properties at that point. Then.
Yeah, with all the test pass, let me try. Yeah, it's true. Need to be.
Although.
Oh no.
Okay. Get items. What?
Bad SQL grammar.
Oh, that's a weird one.
Table items not found.
Okay. So that was broken when you moved those down. Let's move them back up then. Check that does actually like.
Yeah, I'll just run these tests and then.
Yeah.
So yeah, it did work. It was green.
Okay.
So well, I looking at this test, actually it mocks items repository.
Okay. So this is a web controller test, which is okay. That's using a mock items repository and whatever mock MVC is. Okay.
Mock is like an HTTP client, but
okay. So this is quite a high level for the test.
It's a Spring thing, right, which pretends to run the server, but actually doesn't.
Okay. I'm not downhearted.
This test, for example, what does it do? It just mocks this function to return this like a date and an item, right? And then it does HTTP request.
Oh, but that mock items repository then must end up in something that's then created and then run up, right?
Yeah, what I don't get is that like this mock, how can it be even mocked, right? Because we're not auto-wiring it. So this annotation says like mock this thing, but I would imagine it's not in Spring. So my theory is that Spring still injects this.
Okay. Okay. So the DB, I see what you mean. So like the service is having a mock one injected, even though we are actually literally telling it that this is the one you should use.
Yeah.
15 though, like we can at least move 15 out, right? Because that depends on nothing. So that must be all right. Go on.
Yeah, this works.
Okay.
I'll save this, but then just to double check that this doesn't. And then I'll undo. Yeah, this fails. So yeah, that's fine. So it's still
okay. So there's so even though we asked it not to auto wire whatever that thing is, it kind of did. Okay. This Guildrow service test, I can't remember how we'd gone with that. So we still got a bit of work to do here because this is still a Spring Boot test.
Oh yeah.
So we have the Gilded Rose service, and that's mocked. Yeah. Oh, that's like inheriting this mock item repository thing. Mock being then, so Gilded Rose service. So now we pass it the items repository, do we?
Oh yeah. So just going back, we've finished DB items repository, right? So DB items.
I think that kind of got as far as
we could. Yeah, and so we don't need this, and we don't need auto-write, and then this could be just an argument, and this still works. So we moved it out of Spring as well. That's what we.
Are we unexpectedly trying?
Yeah. Yeah, so this is fine. We did it. So just going back to diagram, so I understand. Yeah. So we did Gilded Rose. That was like on the edge of the ground, did items repository. We still have this thing in test where it's not ideal that we manually create. Maybe it should be to do. It's like to do read from properties. Because it's like duplicates in properties, not.
Oh, I think, yeah.
So yeah, this is left, but other than that, just Gilded Rose, which is inside Spring. That's, I guess, the next step. So yeah, that makes sense. Then to look at the test if we follow in the same path.
So, so the Gilded Rose service depends on the items repository that we're now.
Yeah.
Okay, but can we create a mock ourselves? Can we create a mock ourselves and we could just call the constructor of the Gilded Rose service, right?
Yeah. So I think if we construct Gilded Rose service ourselves, we could just pass mock in ourselves as well. So it's mocked by annotation just because it's then mocked and injected. Right. But if we just create it just like that, just like call, I think it's a Makito, so we can just call mock function. Oops.
I mean, I guess the advantage of that sort of mock bean thing is that.
Oh, it's data source now.
It's interesting. Okay. So we now have the sort of issue that we are using one. So we've effectively kind of have two constructors there, don't we?
Right.
So we could give ourselves a constructor of the Gilded Rose service that took the items repository.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, we could push it up. So we basically we cannot construct it this way anymore.
No.
But we really want to, so we can move this up the stack. So data source will be auto-wired where Gilded Rose service is created in web controller.
Yeah.
Right, that's what you mean. Something like that. And then we are constructing DB items repository there ourselves in web controller. So we're creating the whole thing ourselves.
Yeah, it's almost certainly what I meant.
I don't know how that's going to work, but I think it doesn't need to be automated. Well, we'll see. If there's let's start with the test. So this is fine, and we don't need Spring Boot annotation anymore.
That seems to be like a big sort of leap of faith there, but it was a great edit. So if it passes its test, I'm willing to go for it.
I mean, I'm starting with simple things like, we made this test work. First, let's compile and it runs, and then we can see what's happening here. So we have this in web controller. It's only used in two classes, right? Web controller and case, and web controller we're auto-wiring. Actually, we don't need to auto-wire it anymore. We can just do that, right? Just construct it. And then this is it. We don't need to have service here. And this repository could be private. I think everything will work now. So, and we got Gilded Rose service out of Spring as well. Oh, great. Oh.
Yeah, you see, we're back to that place where it's still.
It needs a service, I think. So it still magically mocks it. I forgot.
Oh, yeah. And we knew that because it was. Oh, no.
Oh, interesting. At which point it will be still working. Oh, right. I think, I understand maybe that maybe it only auto-wires inside.
We know that it needed
Control.
to auto-wire. We know that it needed the Gilded Rose service to be auto-wired somehow because it was creating one of those with the mock item repository inside it, wasn't it? That was the only way that test worked.
This web controller.
Yeah.
So it injects this at some point. Yeah, maybe it's even better to make it more explicit, I suppose. So in web controller, we could auto-wire repository. And we were doing this, right? I think that's what might work. So we do this and pass repository. So we still construct repository ourselves.
Okay.
Then it's just injected here. No. It says failed.
So we have these sort of problems where we where we made what feels like sort of a change where everything still compiles, right? Everything's happy, but we just don't know whether it will load until we try and run it.
Yeah.
And that's because I guess until we run it, Spring hasn't done its class path scanning, and it's got no way of knowing whether things can or can't be auto-wired. Sometimes they are with an auto-wired dependency, sometimes they're not, and sometimes the warnings lie to us, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting to know what, and we have to use this annotation because it injects it somewhere, but we're not sure where. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, maybe reverts to the last good space.
I think so. Yeah. I mean,
because just roll back everything.
Providing you never press Command S in any of that, we're okay now.
Well, we'll still use inversion control, right? So, yeah, it's all good. So we can always just drop commits.
Okay.
Command SSA.
So where we are right now, I'm a bit sort of
yes,
I'm sure it's possible to internalize enough of Spring to understand that exactly why that happened, but I don't understand exactly why that happened and why that refactor didn't work. And I've sort of got to the stage where I would like to I'd like to see how much work it would be not to do it that way, right? So fundamentally our issue is at the moment, I think, that we would like to wire up our web controller, but we never ever get to create this, right? That thing is always Spring's job. And in our tests in particular, we never get to create one, right? Magicked into this, and then the dependencies around it.
Created, we do create it here. Well, we don't. Yeah, yeah, you're right. We don't create it.
No. So like we both know HTTP4K. I'm going to keep on saying that. Like I said it too quickly, it's HTTP4K, which is another sort of web library, right? It's another way of running web services from Kotlin, but it's not doesn't really have any dependency injection. So it's designed to be testable, but it's designed so you wire stuff up yourself. And it would be interesting, I think, to see how this thing turned out. Like compare the HTTP4K version, maybe with and luckily, because we knew we were doing this, I think it's possible that you have some sort of HTTP4K version of this app.
Yeah, let's try a quick step before that. If you remember where we stopped, we actually moved Gilded Rose and items repository completely out of Spring, but we still had this to do in DB items test at this thing.
Yeah.
So maybe I have some code which I stashed, which should do this. So what it is basically Spring was loading config object from its properties file. This is a bit of code which does it for us. So now we can. So we get an object.
You that away, but I think we should see it because it just sort of give people an idea of actually what Spring is doing first, right?
Well, this is not necessarily the best way, right? There must be a better way of writing this.
Yeah, but I mean, it's your reproduction of that sort of Spring workflow, which is, hey, I've got some name of my config and I've got some properties files, and I'm going to load from those properties files. Although I guess by the look of things, you're not overriding here, are you? Because you're saying it's one of those files or the other, not that it's both of them.
Yes. It's not exactly the same
No,
behavior. And
but it's the same behavior now.
specific to this project. It's like a bridge for now. Maybe later we could put it in some other format, and then it's all just matching object names.
Yeah,
I guess.
Okay, so that's got a sort of db config thing, which is also interesting.
Yeah, so it's this class, basically.
Oh, so that's sort of it. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And then we can convert it to data source.
Okay, I like that.
The code we've seen.
Yep.
Yeah, and then we can load it from class path. It's just a function which figures out from file name the resource. So now at least we can fix this to-do, so we should be able to define it.
And you mean the to-do that you undid?
Yeah. And then environment will be test, and then it has dbconfig, which we can just convert to data source. But maybe we should keep this config as config, and this, and keep this as config to data source, and that should still work.
Okay, so it's like a shim between Spring's configuration and which allows us to explicitly go and convert that configuration to a data source rather than have Spring automatically do it for us based on things that it knows.
Yep. And yeah, I guess the next step would be maybe a web controller in
Okay.
HTTP.
Let's just have so reminding ourselves what this does. It's marked as a REST controller, which tells Spring something about the return types and so on, and that I guess it's an endpoint, effectively defines a bunch of endpoints.
Yeah.
And then we've got this. We auto-wire the Gilded Rose service. Okay, that needs to be auto-wired because we can't create it, or at least we can't create the web controller. And then this mapping of items. Oh yes, I remember that. So it was like the date. So Spring's managing a lot of mapping for us. That's all good. It's nice. And it's managing rendering a list of item as JSON, which is also good. What do you have in HTTP?
So let me rename this to maybe Spring to just make it clear. Let's go.
Can I point out, by the way, the genius of Spring is that you can rename that and it still works.
Yeah, it's basically
because we didn't reference it anywhere.
Yeah. It's true. And you can have multiple of them with any names. So I think it's nice, but at the same time, it's kind of, ignores fundamentals of the language that like things need to be referenced. Like, there's another layer of indirection, which is like, same pattern. Just I think it's a bit overused maybe for this.
It's interesting, isn't it, that like your web controller here, IntelliJ knows it's unused. Right? We haven't so it knows it's unused. The Spring web controller is not unused. But it's not unused despite the fact there are no other references to it, I guess.
There is a setting in IntelliJ. IntelliJ knows these annotations from Spring.
Absolutely, yeah. That's interesting, though, isn't it? Yeah,
but at the same time, I would expect so. If there is a thing, these annotations from Spring, they actually like auto-wired candidates. But if I search for actions, say auto-wired, no, it doesn't show. Basically, there are no things for this, like what is called navigate. There is no navigate here. There is the relate symbol, which shows something, but the same things, they're not in the search of Spring. So to related things, it only takes us to the same line or Spring Boot application, which is like useless. So like it basically breaks navigation. So all I meant, if it's not shown as unused, it should show some usages. But when I press shortcut to search for usages, so no usages. So broken.
I mean, Spring is a language on top of the language, isn't it? Really, I mean, it's like it requires a plugin in order to get the compiler working. Like all these things, like Lombok, for example. IntelliJ only understood Lombok because there were IntelliJ plugins for Lombok that made it understand it because it was a language on top of Java, and Spring is a language on top of Kotlin or Java. I guess.
Nearly a language.
Nearly a language.
So
so this
code.
So your web controller here, so we explicitly now give it a Gilded Rose service, and it uses that to create this little route here of list items, which takes a logger.
Which is an HTTP handler, which is a function. So I can click on this. This HTTP literally is just a type ls to function from immutable request to immutable response. And that's everything is HTTP handler, including the whole web controller. It's just a function.
Okay. And then, so we've explicitly have to say, hey, look, it's this route that items. We've had to create that rather than it happening automatically. And we've had to say it's a get.
Yeah.
And then we've had to like map out the date from the request. And then we've had to
list item is a function which returns us a handler. Right? And this is what it returns, this lambda. And then it takes request, uses lens, gets the data out. I think I did it just for consistency. I wouldn't use logger for this. We could have a filter which logs. I think that would make more sense to me. But it's just like one-to-one rewrite. So
but it's a bit more complicated than the Spring version, I think. Like you can't just it's harder to sort of maybe it's the lack of annotation. I don't know.
No, like in for Spring version there was this local date converter which just happens to be a line of this somewhere else, and it's a component. Navigate to auto-wired, and it auto-wires you in the middle of this, and it's like, how do you know how it's wired into this thing relates to you? So it's also complicated. It's just have to a few lines.
I mean, yeah,
a bit more hidden, I think.
There's less magic, but because there's less magic, when it goes wrong, you know what went. Yeah. You had to write the thing that went wrong, so you might remember why it went wrong.
Yeah, to be fair, maybe there is a better support for built-in things. So here, when in Spring Web Controller and return list, so this local date was Kotlin X date time. That's why we need to.
Oh, right. Well, that's your first problem.
Yeah, list of items is a standard like Kotlin and Java interface. So that's why Spring just knows out of the box how to do it. And here we don't. So we have a body lens for list of items. So that's maybe the difference.
Okay. And that body window is doing is doing the JSON marshalling then, is it here?
Yes.
Okay.
This is just getter and setter basically.
Okay. So, I mean, we can say that does the same thing. It's differently complex, but I see it does authorization as well and so on. So that's all promising. So, but you say it does the same thing. Oh, but just before we go on, make that new logger.
Oh, yeah.
On line 31. Oh yeah. Right. So we say that this does the same thing. I'm going to say prove it. That is to say, we've got some integration tests. Let's show them working.
Yes, I could import this. Maybe it could be also defined ports. That's nice. So this is an integration test, which basically sets up JDBC, right? And then instantiates everything in Spring.
Okay.
Using test data.
The JDBC is populating, and then this REST template, we like the word template, don't we? Is then being used to, if you scroll down a bit, where are we using that?
It's interesting why it complains, but then it still works. It's like it's a built-in thing. I don't know.
So we're using that to say REST with, okay, so that's a place where we can set up authorization and make a request. So this is actually running against an actual HTTP server, right?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So we should be able to run it against an HTTP4K HTTP server, and if it passes, then they do the same thing.
Yeah, I think we also can construct this ourselves, basically like this, because well, we know the URL. This is the port number from the properties, but just for now, this should do it, right? And then this JDBC thing, we did it before. We can just construct it.
Oh, so we could have fixed this, the other one as well. We just couldn't run. We didn't know how to run it up, I guess, did we? So there was no point taking this test out of Spring before because we couldn't run up the server ourselves. So we might as well have had those auto-wired. But now you're saying that if we run this now, then this will still run against the Spring version because we haven't done anything else, but we're showing that it's the same, still passing.
Yeah, it's basically we stopped auto-wiring these two fields, but they still work. So that's all we proved so far.
Okay.
And then, the next step is bigger, which is basically to construct our own server. And this will be apps controller.
So that's our new version.
Yeah, then we have config already. This is that config.
Okay.
We have config, and then need to create Gilded Rose service. And then data source we have here. We kind of have things already. Data source. And that's really it. It's because the rest it constructs itself right now.
Okay.
Leave it as it is just to see if it works, basically. And then because web control is just a function with HTTP, we need to ask HTTP to plug it into an actual server. So what we can do is just to read the port from config. Well, actually, this thing should also be there.
Okay. Yep.
Then we need to start the server and stop it. Here we're starting like an Undeterred. That's what we're integrating with. And that's it. That's the big change.
Okay, so now Spring's not running this. You're running up an HTTP4K server, but you're running the Spring tests against it. That's quite sweet.
Yeah. And so all of this works. And yeah, I'll commit this while it works because we had good experience just before when things didn't work. So maybe at this point we could construct this ourselves as well. Like here to make it more explicit, what's going on. I'm not sure.
Okay, yep.
The best route would be, so we can pass it explicitly. Then we won't need data source, but then so I think at this point, it would be nice to just, I'll maybe refactor this a bit. I'll create a class called app and just put everything in, but we don't need rest. So it will be the whole wiring basically for our app. Then we can create function like start. And so the start and function stop. And so stop. So this should replace
the data source as well. I mean, that
this should be an argument. Sorry, this is an argument, right?
Yep. I'm thinking that Spring was, because that was a connection pool, wasn't it? Spring was doing something, I seem to remember from a long time ago. But
yeah, I think you must be right. So we need to close it at some point. Maybe.
I do that because you keep on getting this wrong, and so making you.
Yeah, maybe let's do it this way. So we start create, and then we drop tables and close data source. So yeah, let's plug this in and see if this works this time, just to finish the refactoring. And environment is still test. And then instead of server, we could use the app.
Okay,
let's run this. Nothing really changed. Yeah, it all works. That's good. So we didn't. We can delete.
No. Okay. Yep.
So the config. Well, we have config in the app, so we could do that and make it public. Right, then let me reformat this. Then data source we also have in the app. Data source could also make it public. You can inline that. And config is also can be inline. So that's kind of it.
Okay. So here the JDP Synth3C template is, again, we're creating one for this test in order to populate the database, and then the app has got another one that's using to talk to the same database. That makes sense. Okay.
Yes. And then we could refactor this as bit as well, so we could make it like a service, I guess. It could be a repository. They don't have to be public. But anyway, the whole point here is that we could construct the same app in the main function. So I'll just cut this, move it into main, just above the Spring app. And then we essentially can say app will be environment, will be prod here, and we just started. We'll need to close it as well.
Well, I mean, these things get closed by shutting a JVM, don't they?
Yeah. Well. Well. So
So, hold on. So what you're saying is that we had a test. We then made that test, the Spring version of the test that was actually talking to HTTP. We made to talk to this HTTP 4K version of HTTP, and then with a little bit of like refactoring to pull all the dependencies out of the test, we had the same dependencies in the test then, and we could pull them up into our production code, and then we can use them to run the server up in our production code. That's quite sweet. And it means we see everything that our production code requires. So we can see that it requires some config and where it gets it from, the repository, and so on. And if we want, I mean, I guess we could even make this app if we wanted to a data class, and then like we could chop and change little bits of it, couldn't we? We could say it's like this one, but it's like this app, but it has a different data source, or like this other app, but it has. That would be really sweet, wouldn't it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think it also shows that the whole wiring wasn't that complicated. It was like, 5 lines here. That's what it's doing. There is obviously like life cycle, like closing things and so on. It still can be more tricky, but literally 5 lines, even though it looks so complicated. Also, if we wanted to inject something in the middle, we could make this repository as an argument to the app, for example.
Yes.
And then mock it in the middle, but I'm not sure we should be doing that. So let me just quickly run it just to do the final test and see if this works. So yeah, it still returns something like the same data visually, and we had integration tests. I can commit this, and yeah, maybe at this point also we could have a quick look at what we're doing with web controller, because we have all of these auto-wide things. I don't know if you want to remove them, if it's worth it, because we're kind of halfway. But at this point, we should be able to remove all Spring things. Right?
Yeah, I think we could if we tried hard. I mean, I'm obviously convinced because I'm a happy customer of HTTP 4K, and yeah, I think this has been a great demo of where Spring is helpful and where Spring is not so helpful. Maybe we could sort of have a sort of little retrospective around what we learned from this.
You won't believe, but I have slides for that.
Do you? It's almost like we had presented this at a conference and had to prepare it.
So what did we do?
Okay, so we found some dependencies that didn't need to be varied at all, right? So, I mean, sometimes we put in interfaces and dependencies just to prove that we can change them, but we don't need to. And like Spring, maybe, I don't know what encourages that, but it makes it easy. But obviously, if we're not going to have auto wiring, then, and we're going to wire things up ourselves, we want to make it as simple as possible. So we got rid of those places where things didn't need to be changed. That was good. I think the code became simpler.
Yeah, in some ways, I think the whole guild-draws class is just kind of like, it could be a couple functions because it doesn't have state.
Yes.
So it could be a function, really. So sometimes if you, going down this route, like, shows us maybe a path into how we can change design anyway.
Certainly, it's my experience that Spring was born in an age of classes. Like, we express this is a class, and we capture the dependencies in this class as fields, and then we have operations as methods in the class. And we still do that in Kotlin, but we also do other things in Kotlin. We have closures that we capture arguments and so on. And sometimes those are better at expressing what we want. And Spring is not maybe as good as that. These unnecessary interfaces, so there's a place where if we're not mocking a thing, or if we're not injecting a different version, then maybe if the interface isn't actually really telling us anything, we should just get rid of it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Maybe it's similar to your previous point. Spring was born in the age, I guess, when you couldn't mock or you had to have interface basically to mock or fake anything. Maybe that's why people still doing it, even though they don't have to.
I wonder about that, because I think we've for a long time be able to mock classes, but we didn't have functions to express a single operation. And I think that's maybe the big change. So these days we'd use a function type to say, okay, this thing, the dependency between this thing and this thing is not this interface that might have 3 or 4 methods on it. It's just this one function type that is, oh, I need you to get the items or whatever it is. And so in those cases, we don't need an interface because we've got function types that will do for that one operation. So we didn't need the interface. But again, Spring maybe catching up, I don't know, but I don't see that in my reading. And it's where we can express things simpler, we should. On the plus side, though, as we were refactoring, we found ways to make things work with Spring injection that allowed us to damage, in particular, our tests, but also our production code less. So things weren't nullable if we used late init. We could use constructor parameters to make them neither late init nor nullable. And then finally, if we're constructing a thing that we could construct ourselves that depended on something that was auto-wired, then lazy would solve that problem as well. So there were nice techniques. I think we came out of that, weren't they? So those were our sort of tidy first things, and then getting Spring out the tests.
I think with tidy first, it's kind of interesting. Then sometimes you start just literally tidying things, and you discover more things. Like things with late init, what you mentioned, it just starts with like, oh, why this thing is nullable? It's never null, but why is it nullable? Like then it's making it late init. It's like it's var now, but it's never changing. It's just like trying to tidy things, like open up more questions, I guess.
Yeah.
Good in design, right?
I mean, I think we have a feel for what compromises we do and don't want to have in a code base, and there are certainly compromises to auto-wiring.
Yeah. What I meant, especially in the beginning, it was more like trying to get rid of nullable, trying to get rid of late init, and we get in Spring out of our tests.
Yeah.
Is that all the same thing? Like, oh, this test takes like 3 seconds. Can we make it faster? Like, oh, it's faster without Spring. So why not?
Yes. As a strategy, sort of starting at the least dependent things, I think was a good one. So saying there's no point in trying to remove Spring from something that has 17 auto-wide dependencies. Let's go and try and remove injection from a thing that has 1 dependency or no dependencies, really. That works well for us. But there were times when it was hard to work out what Spring was injecting, and those are the places like with the data source where we can punt that for a bit by changing the thing that's injected, allowing Spring to still inject it, but pushing this bubble under the wallpaper of air. So it's sort of hidden behind a bit of the pattern, I think.
What did we learn?
Yes.
What I learned, definitely. Yeah, IDE support is a bit strange. As in, like, I feel like Spring removed certain navigation patterns for me, and didn't help with replacing them.
Yes, luckily I wasn't the one using the keyboard, so I didn't feel your pain there. But on the other side, we removed the dependency injection by the end, certainly for the bits that we saw, but we still had bits of Spring, right? So the JDBC template we were still able to use. It was quite a nice object mapper. We understood it. So there were Spring is DI, dependency injection, and it's a whole bunch of facilities that build on that. Sometimes those facilities, their grain is that you need dependency injection to use them. Not easily, but they have a whole bunch of dependencies, and that's fine because dependency injection will just sort you out. But generally speaking, I've nothing against lots of Spring.
You mean integration with different technologies is actually useful?
Yes, absolutely that. Yes. So Spring has a sort of abstraction for databases that might talk to Mongo as well as JDBC or whatever we might. Those sort of things I think are fine parts of Spring.
I think it's also quite a big toolbox, and what we replaced is not actually one-to-one replacement because they have those actuators endpoint with information from Java beans and all the other
health endpoints and so on, all of which become free. And there were no, to be fair,
to be fair to us, like there were no integration tests for that, so we assume we can like leave them. But
yes, yeah, certainly there's a lot that comes out of the box with Spring.
yeah, but also some bad
Yeah,
things actually.
yeah,
Loading, sorry, loading beans from class path by using magic. It's gone, but yeah.
yeah. We were certainly, there were times when we had code, we had code that compiled fine and ran fine, and we would make a change and still had code that compiled fine, but wouldn't run fine. We were left in times where we didn't know why a thing was wired like it was, how it was wired like it was. Whereas with HTTP, we always had to wire things ourselves. There were never any surprises, albeit we had to go through work, right? And I think there's something in composition, like Spring is composing things with annotations. It's saying, I've got this web controller. There's this annotation that tells me I'm going to use security. There's this annotation that tells me this, that, and the other is going to happen. Whereas HTTP4K, security was a matter of composing a function on top of it, imposes security on top of the roots that are underneath it and so on. Again, I think that's a more functional way of looking at the world. Spring actually is really quite functional, but it's quite functional in Java interfaces, and you can't compose Java interfaces, so you don't have that sort of option. And then annotations are, I think, sort of composition to Java interfaces. But overall, just the slow tests. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And what do we gain?
Yeah.
So we said faster feedback through explicit test wiring. I guess that's faster feedback in terms of how quickly the test ran. So that was, if we were running a single test, it was a lot quicker once we'd got rid of Spring. Better navigation through explicit app wiring. Okay, yeah. So you had this problem, like, how do I find a thing? It's not always easy, even with HTTP4K.
Yeah, well, you can make functions also quite complicated, right? Functions which which create functions.
Yes, absolutely. And like hitting a breakpoint, you often end up with, I'm here in this call chain, but that doesn't, with functions or with Spring, it's like, I can't see the object graph around me. I can only see the things in the call chain. That makes, like, how did I get here? Quite hard in both cases, I think.
Yeah, but at least navigation stays within Kotlin as a language. It's like, it doesn't do anything more dynamic than that. It's like, if you have this annotation, that code somewhere else will just run. It's more like a plugin system for every single component.
Yes. Ultimately, like, in case of Spring, you can substitute anything for anything, which is fantastic. Except if you want to know what anything is at any particular stage.
Yeah.
I think I wrote this last bullet point, which is that cohesion and coupling, the extent to which our, like, the things that should be together are together and things that should be apart are apart. I like explicit wiring because it makes me think about that. I think we had that case of the data source or the JDBC template being the dependency, the way that we wired up that items repository. And I think with Spring, it was very easy to say, I can get this from anywhere. And so I can make anything at any level a dependency of any other thing. And that's not great for separating an app into parts that you can reason with or take out, or like draw boundaries around and reason within that boundary.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe the last slide. So I think we're doing this again quite soon, aren't we? At some London meetup that I'll put in the show notes underneath. I think the end of next week, depending on when you're watching this. So if you want to see it live, be sure to click on the stuff down there. You should totally subscribe to Dmitry's YouTube channel, that'll be down there too. Unless you're watching this on Dmitry's YouTube channel, in which case you should totally subscribe to my YouTube channel. So, Dmitry, thank you very much indeed. And I hope to see you again very soon.
Yeah, see you.
Bye. Bye. If you enjoyed this, you should totally check out the book that I wrote with Nat Price called Java to Kotlin, Refactoring Guidebook. Details of which are in the show notes below.